Traoré's new project, 70,000 free homes for Burkina Faso's people, shocks the world.
Something extraordinary just happened in West Africa. Not a protest, not a coup, not a foreign intervention, but a decision. A decision so unexpected that it caught global institutions off guard and forced economists, diplomats, and media outlets to pause mid-sentence. In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré has announced that 70,000 homes will be built and given away completely free to ordinary citizens. No mortgages, no long-term debt traps, no pilot project excuses. 70,000 families handed keys to dignity. At first glance, it sounds impossible, almost reckless. That's exactly why the world is paying attention. Because this is not just about housing. This move directly challenges the rules we've been told are unbreakable. That poor countries must wait, that development must crawl, that people come second to creditors, balance sheets, and approval from global institutions. Burkina Faso didn't ask for permission. Instead, it asked a dangerous question. What if a government simply decided to put its people first? Within hours of the announcement, warning signals lit up across international finance circles. Questions flooded in, concerns were expressed, and familiar phrases returned. Sustainability, risk, populism. But on the ground, something else happened. People cried, people celebrated. People who had never imagined owning a home suddenly saw a future with walls, electricity, water, and safety. This isn't charity. It isn't symbolism. It's a direct challenge to how development has been defined for decades. And if it works, it doesn't just change Burkina Faso. It rewrites what the world believes is possible. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand Burkina Faso's reality. This is a landlocked nation carrying enormous weight on its shoulders. Years of insecurity, armed violence pushing families from their homes, an economy shaped by decades of extraction, not development. Nearly half the population struggles to survive below the poverty line. Housing is fragile, overcrowded, temporary, when it exists at all. For millions, home means uncertainty. And when people have no stable shelter, instability spreads. Education suffers, health declines, communities fracture. This isn't just a housing shortage, it's a pressure cooker, socially, economically, politically. That's the ground this decision landed on. When Ibrahim Traoré stepped into power in 2022 through a military transition, the global reaction was almost scripted. Another young officer, another young court leader, another chapter in a story the world thought it already understood. International headlines were skeptical from day one. Some predicted isolation, others warned of authoritarian drift. Most assumed this would follow a familiar pattern. Power consolidated at the top, while ordinary citizens waited for change that never arrived. Expectations were low. Cynicism was high. But inside Burkina Faso, the mood was different. Traoré spoke less about alliances and more about sovereignty. Less about image, more about outcomes. And instead of governing through promises, his administration moved quickly into action. Reshaping mining policy, redirecting state resources, and openly challenging economic arrangements long considered untouchable. For critics, this raised alarms. For supporters, it raised hope. What makes Traoré difficult to categorize is this gap between expectation and behavior. He didn't govern the way the world expected him to, and the housing announcement would make that impossible to ignore. Long before the announcement, the signs were already there. In cities and villages across Burkina Faso, people began noticing quiet movements that didn't fit the usual pattern. Land surveyors appeared in open fields and on the edges of overcrowded neighborhoods, marking plots with unfamiliar precision. Trucks rolled in carrying cement, steel, and earth block equipment, not in small batches, but in volumes rarely seen before. Then came the contractors. They weren't the usual Western firms tied to donor programs and feasibility studies. These were companies from Turkey, China, Vietnam, and increasingly Pan-African construction groups that had spent years building capacity far from the spotlight. No press releases, no ribbon cuttings, just activity. In markets, people whispered. In villages, elders speculated. Taxi drivers traded theories. Something large was unfolding, but no one could quite explain it. The silence from the government only deepened the anticipation. Whatever was coming, it wasn't symbolic. It was physical, measured, and already taking shape on the ground. Weeks before any official statement, Burkina Faso was already changing in quiet ways. Survey teams began appearing across the country, measuring land on the outskirts of cities and near displaced communities. Stakes were planted, boundaries drawn. It wasn't random and it wasn't small. Then the materials arrived. Convoys of trucks carrying cement, steel, and compressed earth block equipment moved steadily through major routes. Storage yards filled up. Local suppliers ran out faster than usual. People noticed. But what raised eyebrows most were the builders. These were not the familiar Western development contractors tied to aid packages and consultants. Instead, companies from Asia, the Middle East, and Pan-African construction groups were suddenly active, working fast, quietly, and without publicity. No billboards, no donor logos, no announcements. Rumors spread quickly. In markets, people speculated. In villages, elders debated what it could mean. Some hoped, others doubted. The government said nothing. That silence only confirmed one thing. Whatever was coming wasn't theory. It was already underway. The reaction outside Burkina Faso was swift and revealing. Within hours, major financial institutions signaled discomfort. Statements from the IMF and World Bank followed a familiar script, stressing caution, fiscal discipline, and the need for sustainability. Meetings were requested. Questions multiplied. Western media quickly framed the story through doubt. Headlines focused less on families receiving homes and more on spreadsheets and risk scenarios. How will it be paid for? Is this responsible? Can a country like Burkina Faso afford such ambition? The tone was not curiosity. It was suspicion. Analysts warned of instability. Commentators used words like populist, reckless, unsustainable. Yet none of those reactions addressed the deeper issue. The outrage wasn't really about housing. It was about precedent. Because if a nation under pressure could redirect resources, reject dependency, and deliver something this tangible without external permission, then an uncomfortable question emerges: why wasn't this done before? When the details finally emerged, the story changed. The housing project was not built on loans or emergency aid. It was funded through a deliberate reshuffling of national priorities. First, the government redirected money that had long been flowing outward. Debt payments tied to agreements widely criticized for draining value without improving daily life. Some obligations were renegotiated, others were paused. Second, revenue from newly restructured mining operations played a central role. Gold and manganese that once enriched distant shareholders were now feeding directly into public investment, with profits routed back into the state. The remaining funding came from partnerships outside the traditional aid system. Countries and institutions willing to cooperate without policy strings or political supervision. This wasn't guesswork. Independent economists reviewed the figures and confirmed that the financing model was viable within Burkina Faso's current resource base. The math added up. What made observers uncomfortable wasn't the numbers. It was the realization that the money had always existed. It simply hadn't been used this way before. These aren't temporary shelters or rushed concrete boxes. The homes being built under this project are permanent, carefully designed for Burkina Faso's climate and way of life. Thick earth-based walls keep interiors cool during extreme heat. Roofs are built to last, not patched seasonally. Each house is equipped with solar panels, providing reliable electricity in areas where the grid has long been unstable or non-existent. Water systems include rain collection and connections to newly expanded supply lines, reducing daily uncertainty for families. The design respects culture, not just efficiency. Small courtyards allow space for cooking, family gatherings, and traditional routines. These are homes meant to be lived in, not just occupied. More importantly, The houses don't stand alone. Groups of homes are built as complete neighborhoods with nearby schools, health clinics, market spaces, and community centers. Children can learn, parents can work, healthcare is within reach. This isn't housing, it's the foundation of everyday stability. What sets this project apart is that it was never meant to stop at walls and roofs. From the beginning, the plan followed an integrated model. Housing linked directly to education, healthcare, and local commerce. Every cluster is designed so daily life can function without long, costly travel or dependence on overcrowded cities. President Traoré has repeatedly framed the project around a single idea: dignity, not charity, not survival. Dignity as a foundation for national rebuilding. And this isn't theoretical. Families are already moving in. Keys are being handed over. Children are sleeping in rooms of their own. Mothers are cooking without fear of rain leaking through the ceiling. Elders are settling into homes they never believed they would own. Schools are opening their doors. Clinics are receiving patients. For the people living there, the debate in international media feels distant. What matters is simple. For the first time, stability isn't a promise. It's a place they can lock at night and call home. One of the biggest questions was unavoidable. Who gets a home and who doesn't? With demand far greater than supply, the government knew that even a hint of favoritism could destroy public trust. So instead of quiet allocations, they chose transparency. A technology-enabled lottery system was created, built on clear and verifiable criteria. Families below a defined income level were eligible. Those displaced by conflict or living in unsafe conditions were prioritized. Households with children were placed higher in the selection pool. The process was not hidden behind closed doors. Oversight committees included religious figures, traditional leaders, civil society groups, and randomly selected citizens. No single institution controlled the outcome. When the first selections were announced on national broadcast, the reaction was raw and emotional. Names were read aloud. Lists shifted instantly. For many watching, this wasn't just about housing. It was proof that fairness, real fairness, was possible when power chose openness over convenience. The true impact of the project isn't found in policy documents. It's found in people. A widow who spent years moving between relatives now closes her own door at night. A farmer displaced by flooding watches his grandchildren study under electric light for the first time. Parents who once feared the rainy season now sleep without listening for water dripping through the roof. Their words are simple but heavy with meaning. This is the first place my children feel safe. I never thought I would own anything permanent. My family can finally plan for tomorrow. Housing does more than provide shelter. It brings routine. It restores health. It gives children space to learn and adults the confidence to rebuild livelihoods. For these families, the debate over economic models is distant noise. What they know is stability. A stable home changes how you wake up, how you work, how you dream. And for many, this project didn't just change where they live. It changed how they see their future. As the project gained momentum, resistance began surfacing in quieter, more strategic ways. Leaked diplomatic communications revealed growing unease inside several Western embassies. The concern wasn't framed around construction quality or logistics. It was political. Officials warned that Burkina Faso's approach could become a model, one that reduces dependence on loans, bypasses traditional aid structures, and prioritizes domestic control over resources. In private language, the project was described as destabilizing and difficult to contain. Not because it was failing, but because it was working. If one African nation could demonstrate that large-scale social development was possible without external supervision, others might attempt the same. That possibility unsettled long-standing influence networks built on dependency rather than partnership. Publicly, reactions remained cautious and diplomatic. Privately, the message was clear. This project wasn't just about housing. It threatened the idea that progress must be approved from the outside before it can exist. Beyond the headlines and political debate, the results on the ground are beginning to speak for themselves. Health workers in newly built communities report fewer respiratory illnesses and water-related infections. Proper ventilation, clean water access, and reduced overcrowding are changing daily health outcomes in measurable ways. Teachers are noticing the difference too. Children arriving from the new housing areas are better rested, more focused, and missing fewer school days. With electricity at home, studying after sunset is no longer a luxury. Local authorities have also recorded a decline in petty crime in neighborhoods surrounding the new developments. Stable housing has reduced displacement, tension, and the daily stress that often fuels conflict. None of this is theoretical. These trends are being tracked, documented, and reviewed by independent researchers and local institutions. The early data supports what social science has long suggested: secure housing creates stability that radiates outward. In this case, policy didn't just promise change, it delivered conditions that allowed it to happen. Unsurprisingly, the world has split in its response. Across Africa, a new generation of economists and policy thinkers has praised the project's boldness. To them, Burkina Faso is proving that development doesn't have to follow a slow, externally dictated script. They see speed not as recklessness, but as urgency, a response to realities people live with every day. Traditional financial institutions remain cautious. Their warnings focus on long-term sustainability, future debt obligations, and exposure to commodity price shifts. From their perspective, stability comes from restraint, not disruption. What's really clashing here are two visions of development. One argues that dignity can wait, that progress must be gradual and carefully approved. The other insists that people cannot postpone basic needs for decades. Burkina Faso has chosen a side, and in doing so, it has forced the world to confront a question it has avoided for far too long. Who gets to decide when a nation is ready to care for its own people? The implications of this project stretch far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. For decades, much of Africa has been told that development must come through dependency. Loans first, conditions attached, people last. Progress was something to be approved, delayed, and carefully rationed. Burkina Faso has challenged that logic. By redirecting resources inward and choosing citizens over creditors, it has offered a different path, one where governments act first and negotiate later, where dignity is not postponed for economic comfort. This doesn't mean every country should copy the model blindly, but it does prove something powerful: alternatives exist. Across the continent, leaders, economists, and citizens are watching closely, not for perfection, but for possibility. If housing can be treated as a right rather than a reward, other fundamentals can follow: energy, healthcare, education. Africa is no longer waiting to be developed. It is testing what happens when it develops itself. And once that door opens, it rarely closes again. So now the question turns outward. What if other nations chose this path? What if governments stopped waiting for approval and started acting on behalf of their people? What would your country look like if housing was treated not as a privilege, but as a basic human right? Burkina Faso's experiment is still unfolding, but one thing is already clear: this isn't theory written on paper. Families are living it. Children are growing up inside it. Communities are forming because of it. History doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it appears quietly, brick by brick, home by home. Whether this model spreads or is resisted will shape the next chapter of development far beyond West Africa. That's why this moment matters. Share the story, talk about it, question it, debate it, because what's happening right now isn't just policy. It's history being written in real time, and all of us are watching it take shape.